motion. Let's see, so would you do roll call?
Sure. That's all right. Commissioner Graham, absent. Commissioner Hutton, absent. Commissioner Skinner, absent. Commissioner Needham.
Here.
Commissioner Slavic. Here. Commissioner Appel, absent. Commissioner Gibb Randall. She's here.
She was here,
Yeah, she's here. Commissioner Callawart. Here. Chair Brown.
Here?
Commissioner Overpeck, absent. Commissioner Mursky.
Here.
Councilmember Bannister.
She's here.
She's here.
Yeah.
And Councilmember Smith is absent at this point.
Yeah.
So you
All right.
don't have a quorum at this moment, but you will.
Okay. All right, thanks, Emily. So the next item is the approval of the agenda. Are there any comments or requested additions to the agenda? I hear no response, so the agenda, do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All who approve, say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? No, it passes unanimously. The next item is the approval of the minutes from our last meeting, which was October 24th, I believe. Are there any suggested additions to the minutes or corrections?
I move that they be approved as submitted.
Okay. All who approve the minutes as they stand, say aye.
Aye.
Any nay? Okay, this also passed unanimously. So now we're at the point where public commentary. Please approach the microphone and just state your name and let us know what's on your mind. Okay, I guess that ends the public commentary portion. So we'll go on to unfinished business. The first item on the agenda was a document submitted by Crescent, I believe, a while back, commission participation in RFP processes. So we haven't really had a discussion about this, so it wasn't clear where it came from and under whose authority and what the expectations of city staff were.
I'm not sure either because it's an internal working document,
Oh.
so I'm not sure how it. Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure myself, Chair Brown, because it was an internal document that we were working on to try to develop some guidance for participation in interviews, because we were looking and actually did invite participation with the interview on the MRF RFP, so we were looking to have that for the representative for that. So it was a working draft document, so I don't know how and when and if I wasn't aware that it got released, so.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
I apologize. I think you might have sent it to me, and I assumed that
Okay.
it was public,
Oh,
so.
Okay.
Okay.
So,
Well, that's that. So do you know when the city staff would be present their policy suggestion?
well, again, it was an internal working document. I guess just a quick background, this was an item that I received from our procurement manager, who actually got it from the earlier staff, actually Matt Nod, when he was working. So this is something that's been just around, try to lend some internal guidance, and just with the project we were working on and that opportunity, it got shared with me, and so I just kind of took it a next step, moved it forward for review. So it's an internal working and really for just those instances when that was going to come into play. So it was
Okay.
meant to be a helpful guidance, informal document, not meant to be anything of any sort of policy or any, it was really just kind of a.
Okay, but it sounds like if Matt Nod was involved, it's been bouncing around for some time.
Yes, sometime, yes,
So
to the point that
I think it
didn't
would
even know when
be,
it was.
I really think this would be a good thing to resolve quickly. Just as a point of policy for all the commissions.
Mr. Chair, thanks for the feedback. I think it's good for commissions that have specific expertise to participate in procurements, particularly when there's a best value aspect to it. So under the charter, the administrator has the ability to set the processes for a procedure for procurement. So I think what we can do is take what the working document is, bring it to a final form to address all commissions, which will establish kind of the rules as an administrative procedure for the participation of appointed commissioners.
Okay, great. When do you think that might be ready?
Don't know, I haven't seen the document. I don't think it'd be that hard to finalize it. So I can only give you assurances that I'll use my best efforts to get it done.
Okay, well, thanks, Howard. Thank you. Okay, so that will remain as unfinished business until further notice from the city administrator. So the next item on the agenda is the integrated pest management, where we have a presentation by the city's Parks Commission.
Not the Parks Commission.
Parks Department, sorry.
Parks Department.
Parks Department.
Parks and Recreation Services. I'm Dave Borneman. I run the city's Natural Area Preservation Program. Here with me is Michael Hahn, who's also a NAP staff member, and Scott Spooner, who's the Deputy Manager in charge of maintenance. Colin Smith is hiding there in the second row as well. He's our Manager of Parks and Recreation Services. Victor Morales helped put this presentation together, but he's not with us here tonight. But any question? Thank you. Any questions about the golf courses? Scott can certainly answer. We have, if not familiar, about 163 parks in the city, 2,188 acres. Those cover a wide range of different things. Parks and Recreation Service Unit provides a balanced network of formalized landscapes, play structures, outdoor recreation opportunities, open lands, natural areas, wildlife corridors, view corridors, and greenways that preserve the city's natural, aesthetic, and community character. Maintaining these parks in a manner consistent with the environmental ethic that is prevalent among the citizens of Ann Arbor is a high priority for us. By reducing reliance on pesticides and incorporating low-risk control options, integrated pest management, or IPM, reduces both pests and pesticide risks. That's why we've made it our policy to incorporate IPM procedures into the maintenance of our parks. That's what I want to talk a little bit about tonight is IPM and how we use it in the parks, both within natural area preservation or NAP, as well as the golf courses and other general park maintenance. Pests in our parks, any noxious or invasive plant, problem insect, plant disease, rodent, nematode, or microorganism that is detrimental to the environment or the management plan for the selected park or facility. That's how we define pests. Proper identification of those is critical, as is an accurate assessment of the threat that it poses, so we can help determine the correct management strategy to pursue. In addition, many pest problems are associated with particular site conditions. Often the pest appears as a symptom of an underlying cause. Eliminating the pest without correcting the condition that allows the pest to become a problem only leads to recurring pest problems. So what is IPM? I will read this rather long definition just so everybody can hear it out there. IPM is a long-term pest management system that uses all suitable techniques for the prevention or suppression of pests that are harmful to the health, function, or aesthetic value of city-owned landscapes, buildings, and facilities in an efficient, effective, and environmentally responsible manner. We can often accomplish this through accurate pest identification, frequent monitoring for pest presence and impact, applying appropriate action thresholds, and by making the habitat less conducive to pests using mechanical, cultural, physical, and biological controls. If none of these control methods are effective, only then might we consider using an appropriate pesticide of some sort. So broken down into different parts, IPM starts with prevention. A healthy natural area or healthy turf is a good way to keep pests out. They can better resist the encroachment or the invasion of those pests. If not, then we can turn to mechanical methods that might include prescribed burning like here, as well as mowing, cutting, hand pulling, or aerating turf. Other methods might be control or cultural controls that could include selecting native plants which are better adapted to Michigan's climate and are the most competitive against the invasive species. In turf areas, we can utilize proper irrigation techniques and monitoring the weather forecast to avoid overwatering, and also attracting beneficial insects to reduce pest populations. Physical controls might be fencing like this to keep out deer or other browsers. or just to maintain a dense turf or a thick stand of native prairie grass or other native vegetation that will help prevent many weeds from getting established there. Thin areas with bare soil often allow weeds to germinate. There are biological controls that are often used if they're available. That's a way of introducing a control organism or a natural enemy of the pest that we're trying to control. A classic example is the introduction of Gallericella beetles to control the highly invasive purple loosestrife in our native wetlands. Another example might be the BT or Bacillus thuringiensis that's used to control gypsy moth caterpillars. We've tried some other innovative sorts of things. You probably heard about the goats that we tried at Gallup Park this year. There's lots of discussion about using goats. We brought in several and they worked on the islands out there. Goats are great at eating some of the invasive shrubs we have and poison ivy as well. Unfortunately, they might eat other desirable things as well. There's also a fencing issue. Gallup was a great spot because we could put them on the islands there and try them out, and they couldn't go anywhere. So that was a fun and very popular, highly visible approach we tried. We've also experimented with some vinegar spray. It's actually not just vinegar, a combination of vinegar, table salt, and detergent. We tried that in 3 parks this summer and had some success with that, especially in the playgrounds where we wouldn't ever use any herbicides, but we could put it there in the 5-bar. It would kill the plants. It's not a systemic thing. It doesn't kill the roots, so anything with a bigger root would come back, but it was a good way to burn it down in the short term. We plan to expand that in the future to most, if not all, of our 81 playgrounds. And one of the things that we battle with in Knapp is buckthorn shrubs, and we tried something called buckthorn baggies, which is a non-chemical way to control them. It involves simply putting a little plastic baggie over the cut stump. We tried this with somewhere between 200 and 400 baggies in a couple parks, putting them on in the spring of 2018, and collected them a year and a half later, this past November. They were about 75% effective. It's a great solution for people in their backyards and things. A little bit harder when we're dealing with several thousand acres of parkland. But we're always looking for different innovative sorts of techniques. And if none of those work, then we look at potential chemical controls. Chemical control should be used only when other pest prevention and non-chemical control measures have failed to reduce pests beyond tolerance thresholds. When a pesticide must be used, we use the smallest amount of the weakest solution of the least toxic product that will meet pest management goals, apply to the most targeted method at the most effective time of year. Chemical controls begin with spot treatments, sometimes applied to individual stems of pest plants to avoid any collateral damage to non-target plants. Broadcast spraying to larger areas would only be a last resort. When chemical controls are used, applications are conducted only by trained and state licensed personnel. Methods employed conform to all recognized industry standards, which are regulated and endorsed by state and federal regulatory agencies and university research institutions. Furthermore, we adhere to all product labels, which are enforceable legal documents regulated by the EPA. So I want to talk a little bit about, and then finally, evaluation. It's important that we monitor these areas to make sure that we're being effective, we aren't having any unacceptable negative consequences to any non-target organisms, and to see if our control efforts should be continued there or not. So IPM takes on some different forms, both at Knapp and the golf courses, and I'm not an expert on those other areas, so as questions come up, we'll call other people up here to answer those. But in recent years, golfers have developed playability expectations related to all areas of the golf course, mainly on greens, tees, and fairways. They expect these areas to meet certain conditions. Normally, these areas have to be filled with dense turf, low-cut, weed-free, with a nice color. If these expectations are not met, golfers leave and find a different venue that meets their criteria of what a golf course should play and look like. At Leslie Park and Huron Hills golf courses, we follow a meticulous IPM and drift management program that combined allow us to meet these standards while maintaining the expectations of the golfers. There are 650 golf courses in Michigan. Leslie Park Golf Course is one of only 11 of those 650 to be certified by both Audubon International and the Michigan Turfgrass Environmental Stewardship Program. Huron Hills Golf Course is one of only 25 of those 650 that participate in the Monarchs in the Rough program. Our golf course superintendent, Victor Morales, tells a story of being called up by other golf courses in the area and asked about this program because some of our Ann Arbor golfers went to their golf courses and asked them why they weren't involved in the monarchs in the rough. So we're helping to take this program to other area golf courses as well. Maybe the best way to kind of explain our approach to IPM is taking through a case study. This is one that we've used here at NAP. Maybe you've heard about it. We deal with lots of invasive species. We're always trying to catch them early on when they arrive here. And one of the ones that just made an appearance within the last couple of years is stiltgrass. It's a highly aggressive invasive species. It's very problematic in the southeastern part of the U.S. We first had documented occurrence of it just west of town in 2016. It can take over areas and displace native vegetation. It finally reached the edge of Ann Arbor 2 years later in 2018. So we had a chance to try to jump on it before it got too well established, before it got looking like this. These are luckily not local pictures, but this is what we're trying to avoid. So what did we do? Well, first we formed a siltgrass working group with some area agencies. Fortuitously, the area where it showed up is right where some different property owners, such as county parks and the Legacy Land Conservancy, all have land. So we were all very concerned about this, and we formed a working group. We started trying different things. We've tried burning it, first trying with the propane torches. That's a good way to kill young plants early in July, but it's a very slow and inefficient method. We tried our prescribed burning that we do a lot of. The problem is spring burn season is too early for the plant in its life cycle. Fall is too late. It's an annual, so it just grows and does its whole thing in one season and then dies in the fall. And spring and fall, we're not well suited to that. That's why we're trying the propane torches. Hand pulling proved to be very slow and inefficient. Mowing is also not good. In fact, it spreads the plant around, spreads the seeds, so that's probably how it got to the area in the first place, perhaps through mowing decks. We thought about bringing goats out there, but there's no assurance that they will eat this plant. Goats tend to browse a little bit higher, and this is a fairly low-growing plant. There's also concern that goats might spread the seeds, as deer are known to do. We considered then different herbicides. There are some grass-specific herbicides, and this being a grass, maybe it could work with that. But it's too slow acting, and that doesn't mean that we're just too impatient. The plant grows so quickly and sets seed and is done. It takes the herbicide, the grass-specific herbicide, it's too long to be effective. By the time it kills the plant, it's already produced the seeds that are viable. So then we considered maybe using some glyphosate, and especially a weaker solution of that we thought might just be effective at killing that but not hurting other things. The problem there's still issues with non-target species with something like glyphosate, and an issue of potentially developing resistance in the plant itself so that it wouldn't be effective in the future. That led us to looking at a product called Scythe, which is a contact herbicide, much like that vinegar we talked about earlier. It's not systemic. It doesn't kill the whole plant. It just burns it out and kills the vegetation that's green above the ground then. But this being an annual and short-lived, it seems to be effective at that. So it's much more effective and efficient than any of the other non-herbicide methods that we've used, and that's what we ended up using after this long process to come up with this one product. We've also there's other examples of times that we've had to use herbicides when no other controls work, such as on Phragmites and reed canary grass. A case study from outside of NAP in the other parks might just be poison ivy. We get lots of calls from the public about poison ivy. If it's in the middle of a natural area, we let it grow. But if it's along a trail or on playground or something, we get lots of calls from the public about the need to control it. Hand pulling is not a very effective method, especially if you're sensitive like I am. You can get a serious rash from it, not just in the summer, in the winter as well.
Was that your arm?
That was not my arm, but it could have been. You can still get a rash in the winter. So pulling is not a very effective method, especially with volunteers and work days and things. We considered goats, but again, some of the same issues about getting them to eat just what you want them to eat there, and not other things. So we end up using glyphosate in these cases. It's translocated to the roots. It kills the entire plant. Most of the spots we're using this are areas that we can just target the poison ivy and not target other things around there as well. So what herbicides do we use? We can give you, we've done an inventory of all the products that we use in our parks, and so we can run through some of those without going into too much detail. Starting with the golf courses, they have been using a product called Miramichi, which is organic product listed there by the, what's this called, the Organic Materials Review Institute. And a word you'll see on these words in italics towards the top, either warning, danger, or caution. Just to tell you what those are, those are the toxicity ratings that are on the labels for the herbicides. Danger is the most toxic, then warning, and then caution is the least toxic. So that's just what that word means there. And these slides will tell you what time you apply them, what we use them for. Golf courses also use clopyralid, or the product is Lantrell. They especially use this on white clover and dandelions, and mainly in the high-quality areas such as the greens, the tees, and the fairways. They wouldn't be using this out in the rough someplace. Other IPM approaches they could use, they might look at plugging or coring, which is removing the taproot of those plants, but we don't have a nursery large enough to have enough of these plugs to put in, and some of these large clover patches might require 40 or 50 plugs to replace those. But what we like about Lantrell is that it uses, it's a low dose of the product, and it's one of the few herbicides that we can use that will not damage the bent grass, which is a turf grass that we use in the golf courses there. Those are the only herbicides that they use in the golf courses. Within the other parks, one of the things we use is a 3-product combination of 2,4-D acid, clopyralid again, and dicamba. This is used in turf grass, and not all the turf grass, but just in some of the higher, the rental fields that we use. We have about, let me get my numbers right here. We treat about, we mow probably 675 acres of turf in the parks. Of those, about 25 acres, which is about 3.7% of everything that we mow, are the ones that are fields that are rented out and where there's an expectation of higher quality turf there for baseball, softball, and soccer fields. So those 65 fields are the ones that get treated with this combination. The vast majority of the mowed turf isn't treated at all. At NAP, one of the things we use is the glyphosate that you've probably all heard about. We use a water-based version of that. Some of the concerns that you read about glyphosate are from the what's the word I'm looking for, Mike? The formulation. It's a water-based formulation. It's the carrier. It's what's the word I want? The difference between Roundup and Rodeo. Surfactant. That's what I'm looking for. Or from the surfactant. So we use a water-based one that doesn't carry that surfactant. And if we need it, we can add a surfactant into it. You'll see a picture there of somebody with a yellow glove on. We call this the bloody glove method. We actually will use this. There's a chemical-resistant glove on their hand covered by a cotton yellow glove. They'll spray the glove and swipe it up individual stems of loosestrife or teasel or something like that. So we actually are treating individual stems with that. And glyphosate or Roundup is a caution, so that's the lowest toxicity. Sometimes you hear about, is if either this is bad, we should use something else. I'll show you in a minute some other ones that we use carry higher toxicity ratings. I mentioned Scythe, which we use on the stiltgrass. Triclopyr is another one that's used instead of glyphosate. That carries a danger warning. We use that mainly on cut stumps. You can see the blue dye there. We don't paint the whole stem on a plant, on a woody shrub. It's just that outside cambium layer that is alive. It carries the nutrients and would translocate the herbicide down to the roots. So we just paint the perimeter of that. Finally, imazapyr we use on Japanese knotweed, one of our other problematic herbicides. The literature suggests, and our own experience shows us, that not one herbicide works the same on all different plants. Different species are best controlled by different herbicides. So we do a lot of literature research to try to identify which chemicals are going to work the best and apply it in which manner. In closing, IPM keeps our natural areas beautiful and ecologically functional. And if you'd have told me 25 years ago that we'd be using herbicides, I'd have said, oh, you're crazy. But as I've been in this field for a while, I recognize that we really can't do what we do without careful use of herbicides as part of a broader IPM system. And with that, I and my colleagues are happy to answer questions.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Dave. Any questions? No, Dave?
How did the goats work out? I think they worked out great in a place like Gallup, where the big issues there, that's not an area with, known for a lot of high-quality native vegetation, but we're trying to clear out the brush so canoeists could see the island, park users could see the water. So we wanted them to eat everything there, and they worked great for that. We'll see. They had to come back in the fall for a little bit of follow-up, and I think we'll wait and see. Maybe there are plans to come back in the future to bring them back for some maintenance level. We've talked about if we could use them in any of our natural areas. And the issue is in a high-quality site, we only want certain individual plants targeted, and we can't get the goats trained to do that.
Right, any questions? Chip?
I'm just wondering if we can share some of these techniques like the baggie around the buckthorn stem with the public via webpage. I think that would be something that would have broad
Sure.
public applicability, since you talked about, hey, it's tough to do on 600 acres, but everybody can do this in their backyard.
Yeah, we could easily share those and some of these techniques.
Yeah.
Do you think that would work with the Amber
Honeysuckle?
honeysuckle as well?
I would think so. Yeah, I think any of those woody shrubs would work.
Essentially, the plastic bag stops photosynthesis because it blocks the sunlight from getting.
Could you, I hate to, delve too deep into it, you just you cut down the shrub,
My
you
comment
put a
period.
plastic bag over it and rubber band it around the
I think
stump?
the buckthorn baggies themselves are higher thickness plastic, and they need to sit outside for, I think we let ours sit for 18 months or something like
Okay.
that, so they marinate for a while. A thinner plastic could work. There is a good chance that it would break down and then not do anything, so.
Right, but they're not translucent.
They're not, they're black bags.
Yeah.
And I think the labels say that they're good for 2 seasons. After that, they just break down from the sun's rays.
Okay. Right,
Yeah, thank you, that was wonderful. And I assume you put out signs of some sort when you apply herbicide?
Yeah, we do, both because of state law, but the city regulations are higher and stricter than that. We're required by council action to put out their large yellow signs, like this big 70 by 11. Mike, tell you.
Signs are required to be bright yellow, 10 inches by 14 inches at a minimum. They have to talk about the product that we applied, the toxicity rating, the date in there's one other thing that is escaping me at the time.
It's the toxicity rating, what we're treating it for.
Yes, and then what we're treating, yep. And then those, per resolution, have to be posted for 48 hours.
Yeah, even though any of these products that we use are, once they're dry in the plant, they're considered safe. So that toxicity rating basically goes away once the material's dry, but we're still required to keep it out for 48 hours.
over here, any questions?
Just a quick,
Oh, yeah, Ann, and then John.
Yes, well, I just wanted to tie in that thank you, Dave, for this great presentation, and Elena DeRiggi and some of our members are preparing a resolution urging council to ask staff to compile and disseminate promotional materials to the residents related to all these great techniques and signage that you all do.
Yep, we look forward, happy to share that information, and people are welcome to contact our office, and we can share whatever we know about these products.
So this committee is going to address it again in January with Elena DeRiggi, and that was my understanding. Is that your understanding
That's
too,
true,
Em?
yeah, correct. John?
Thank
yeah, I would second that as well, or third it, I guess. The question that I had, though, is did I hear only Leslie is certified, or is also Huron Hills certified? I think you only said Leslie, right?
Leslie's certified, and Huron Hills is a member of both the programs. At Huron, we just haven't gotten all of everything together.
So the intent is to get there?
That is the intent.
Okay, good.
I think it's just a matter of documenting all those things. So it isn't that we're doing different practices there.
No, the practices are all the same, it's just the documentation and actually going through the certification.
Okay,
That's
great.
for the Audubon International certification.
And for the Michigan Turfgrass Environmental Stewardship Program.
Super.
Yes.
So most of the products that you were talking about were herbicides. So I think there's more of a concern about insecticides. So do you all, what insecticides do you use? Or do you use any chlorpyrifos or other neonicotinoids?
When I came to the golf courses in 2009, we had some leftover neonicotinoid. Yeah, Merit. And I sprayed it because we had it. So since that point, I had not bought any, and I don't think Victor has had any either. It was just kind of on my part, it was kind of a decision not to, just looking at the research, I decided not to do that and try other methods for dealing with grubs, basically.
Sure. Yeah, and you don't use chlorpyrifos?
No.
Yeah, because that's banned in the European Union because of human toxicity, so, but the EPA hasn't banned that yet in the United States. So that's why I'm
used it.
specifically asking about that.
No.
It's controversial. Okay. Any other questions? Or Shannon?
What do you see as just issues that you see on the horizon in terms of IPM for you and the city? Like, what do you can't predict the future, but what is keeping you up at night?
What's keeping us up? I think one of the things, we hear the same news everybody else does about lawsuits about glyphosate and things, so we are monitoring those situations and trying to be current with what the science is and looking at whatever other options there might be out there. The fact remains that glyphosate is still, we think, the best product for what we need it for. A lot of the concerns, I think glyphosate issue gets confusing with food issues and GMO and aerial spraying on crops and things, which is a very different application than what we're doing with it. So we're trying to just not be have a knee-jerk reaction to what we might hear in the media, but really try to follow the science of it. And we've hosted a roundtable discussion at the local Stewardship Network conference up in Lansing last year. Mike and I and some others from the Ecology Center talking about these issues, just to have an open, upfront discussion about it. I think that's the best thing we can do is to have open discussions about it and hear the concerns and make sure that we're current with our decisions about them.
Any other questions? Oh, Bob?
I don't know if you can even speak to this, but do you know if non-parks properties that are city-owned are following IPM practices?
I don't know if they have, I'm not sure if they have an IPM policy like us yet. We have started, we have a quarterly meeting with everybody in the city that we have identified to date who uses herbicides. So besides parks, there are folks in public services who might use them on streets and things, and we've started, they're probably a little bit behind where we are in terms of documenting and inventorying what all the products are. I do know, actually, Molly, you want to say anything about this? I forgot that you were sitting back there.
So, sure, I can get up and speak to that. So, in the past, we have used small amounts of glyphosate along bridge decks and in certain areas to treat, the shrubby material that comes up between cracks. This year, we have not used any. We've tried the vinegar solution, but we don't have a formalized IPM. So, just because we almost never use it.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else? Somebody down here? Okay. Oh, Mike.
Quick question about parks, particularly turf grass that's not managed by city personnel, because we do have some parks that are adopted by businesses and then managed by private companies. Is there any communication with them about their turf grass care choices?
I have not had any communication with any of those companies.
I can weigh in and say, I know a couple years ago when Matt Nod was still here, we were approaching that issue. I think the council ordinances that any chemicals applied on city parkland, by staff or contractors need to follow that same signage. So I know we were asking the questions back then and communicating with them. I don't know if we've closed the loop on that. It's something that we've been aware of. If they aren't following those guidelines, they should be, but.
We may want to get in better touch with Canon about that, particularly in Wheeler Park. They may just be fertilizing, but I see all sorts of things happening there that don't necessarily seem to meet the same standards that you guys are all doing in your work.
We'll look into it.
Yeah, do you see that as part of your role? Or is that another city department that should be doing that?
Doing what specifically?
Oh, monitoring the parks that are being maintained by, not
That
by
would
the
probably
city.
fall under my
Okay.
jurisdiction, I would say,
Okay.
so.
Okay. All right, anybody else? Okay, well, thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
So the next item on the agenda is the Solid Waste Resource Management Plan.
Good evening, Commissioners. Creston Sutton, Public Services. With me tonight, introduction, Riley Machewski, already stepped up, part of our team on the Solid Waste Resource Management Plan, and City Administrator Lazarus as well. And passing on regards from Eileen Naples, our new Resource Recovery Manager, who had hoped to be here but had another commitment that she couldn't make it. So I'll be passing the baton to her because this will probably be my last meeting, and she'll be more of the regular provider of content around solid waste to you folks moving forward. So tonight, pretty straightforward. Want to come back to you folks, update you and fill you in on where we left off and what's transpired since our Solid Waste Resources Management Plan team came to you folks in August. So as a quick refresher, August 22nd, converted your typical work session, thank you very much, into an actual full session so that our team could come and present to you on our process that we had completed to develop the draft Solid Waste Resources Management Plan. Went through the process that was involved, culminated in the recommendations that were coming out of that. And shortly after that, and it was even acknowledged after the discussion with the commission, that we were going to the City Council work session very shortly thereafter on September 9th to also present the plan as well as some other solid waste updates. And so we had both of those sessions sharing the process, the plan, in its initial complete draft form to both you folks and the council, and sought input from that. However, following the council work session in the September-October timeframe, the team, we received a set of questions from various council members. Wasn't everyone, but certainly a full set, which for the record, that's what that blue underline is, a link there, but it's also listed in the packet was the set of questions and the responses that were developed for those. And then around that same time frame, Administrator Lazarus, certainly a staff input, but Administrator laid out the memo titled The Solid Waste Roadmap, really culminating with the various discussions, large part being the plan, what we had heard, where we were headed to put it to a final draft form, but also other areas, including regionalization, that you folks have certainly been talking about, and a topic of interest, contracts, and the like. And so feeding all of those items in, the presentations, the discussion at those sessions, the follow-up questions, the Administrator's Solid Waste Roadmap over the late October, November timeframe. Revisions were made to that initial complete draft from August to develop the November update, which was attached to the packet tonight for your review, both a clean and a red line version. So to identify for the audience at home and folks that may not have gone through the red line or the clean version, changes that were made the very beginning, actually at the very front of the document, even ahead of the table of contents. Administrator Lazarus was very kind, and really appreciate him taking the time and the effort to develop a cover statement for the plan. as he sees this and the program moving forward. There was also an addition of a forward section to the beginning of the document ahead of the executive summary that was included in the initial draft, incorporating the current solid waste goals and discussions regarding measures and metrics so that those could be brought in. And again, some discussion, and we can answer questions if you do, but that was another aspect that the plan really didn't hit because we were looking at our programs and service delivery. And then specifically to those service delivery and the recommendations from the plan, there were revisions made particularly to the recommendation around residential recycling that in the initial draft that was framed around a consolidation of residential collections to bring that fully in-house solid waste, trash, recycling, and compost to city delivered services, and that that was modified to now be titled Improved Residential Recycling Collection. That we are certainly looking to improve that, gain more efficiencies and cost effectiveness, but now through a competitive procurement process to evaluate how to do that. So that addition was there. And actually a slight but not insignificant item where we did have literally a typo, a number that did not get carried forward correctly and got corrected in a couple spots in the document around the recommendation for consolidated commercial collection, that if the recommendation were implemented with the city basically getting out of the front load business of dumpster collections, the savings that could be realized was 1.3 million rather than the 660,000 that was in the body of the document. It was correct in the cost analysis at the back of the document, but just wasn't in the tables correctly, excuse me. And so that revised document was put together and put out to you folks with the agenda and reviewed internally. And so really the steps to complete this process and this plan to put the pin in it, so to speak, to move things forward, is have tonight for your consideration a resolution that was drafted by staff, by myself. Folks helped me with it through reviewing it, but asking for your consideration tonight to recommend that City Council accept this plan and move forward with its recommendations. And at the time, putting the presentation together was my hope and target. I've got a date on there of December 16th, which I had the item in Legistar, but with a few other things that were going on, it didn't get through its review process, so it's not on the initial draft agenda for the 16th, and so is likely to be scheduled for the first meeting of January, because it just hasn't gone through the internal review process. And then after that, it'll be up to staff to undertake the steps to implement the recommendations of the plan, but realizing and recognizing, and it's mentioned in the document, that there's still recommendations or approvals even that need to come through, whether it's this body, but certainly City Council with any contracting ordinances, whole myriad of things that will still be going through that will need approvals along the way. But this lays the roadmap and the strategy for us going forward for these programs.
Okay. Well, thank you, Crescent. So I just had one comment, or one question, actually. It's a 438-page document. Mm-hmm. So is the document that was presented to us, are all the changes in red font?
Yes, so there was two documents that were in the packet. One was clean, and the other included the red lines. And the bulk of the 432, not to say the front part of this plan isn't large, the really kind of text, if you will, is 99 pages. So it's less than a fourth of it. Page 100 and back is the background information, so material from the public engagement, the citizen survey, the cost of service analysis. Those items did not change because there wasn't anything that affected that. So the red lines would have just been in that first.
Okay, yeah.
First
So
section.
just so that we understand that all that was changed from the August 22nd document is in red, is redlined.
Yes, other than the fact I didn't do an entire red line of the administrator's statement document and the forward section. So those are all brand new,
that's
and
all
rather
very
than
clear.
have it all red and underlined,
That's
I
all
thought
very
we could
clear.
just do that clean.
Yeah, that was all very
But then
clear.
the modifications within the body are the red lines.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah. It's a little hard going through 432 pages.
Yes,
and,
I agree.
Comparing two
It
documents.
is as you're putting it together, too.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
thanks. So, any questions? I think I have one, another one. And that is, you mentioned on page 3 of the, first I want to thank you for this whole process. I know it's been a long one, and we're reaching closure, we're close to reaching closure here for sure. So, you mentioned on page 3 that the collection of residential recyclables, that the city will compare whatever cost estimates there are in the RFPs to the city's cost. So will the city formally submit an RFP that's comparable to what's been asked of an outside vendor?
I don't know if Mr. Lazarus might speak to that. That could certainly be part of that.
I'm just
but
asking
it's-
because-
Yes. We have the cost of service analysis as the basis for our expected costs, but as to
So I
the
think
formal
what
process.
Preston's trying to say is no.
Okay.
That hasn't been my direction today, but that we do have the cost of service analysis,
Yeah.
I would serve a basis.
So I think we've done a good job of identifying direct and indirect costs for our providing the service. That document is public, so any potential interested parties can see how we put it together. If we did a proposal, that wouldn't be public. So I think it serves the interest of the city and the potential field of offers better to have that out there so they can see how we came up with the cost of service. That allows them to sharpen their pencils and to look and see where they can be competitive. And I just want to add, it's not necessarily a direct cost issue, it's a value issue when we look and see what we get back in. And those are things that we'll bring back and we'll have a discussion on, because what drives our ability to do the other things in the solid waste resource management plan is adopting the whole suite of recommendations to free up resources in one place so we can apply them elsewhere, while being ever mindful of the fact that the solid waste millage is one thing that impacts the general affordability of our community. So I think what we've provided gives more than enough information to those who would be interested to submit a really sound proposal.
Great, okay.
So I have a question. In looking at this document and knowing that there's been discussion of creating a solid waste district downtown to try and address the alley issue, if this body is to recommend acceptance of the plan, how does that recommendation guide potential direction for exploring the opportunity for a solid waste district downtown?
It's, if you bear with me, Councilmember Smith, it's in there. We were careful, though, to not, with our language, that we didn't want to imply a biz for a
Sure.
specific reason,
Right.
because a
No, I
biz
understand
going, all
completely.
that. So we were careful with the wording, but what we definitely tried to describe was just that, a district, a service
I
level,
just wanted
and
to
fees
make
based
sure
on-
that any action that this body took in recommending something to council didn't necessarily preclude that from happening.
So I've had discussions with Ms. Pole over at DDA and trying to use their contacts and network to pull together the downtown stakeholders to talk about what a solid waste district in the downtown would look like. You know, the Main Street Biz would be one, the State Street Merchants Association, to try and provide a better level of service. Some things we have done is we have increased, this past year, with council's approval, we put another FTE in the budget for enforcement of
Right.
alleyways. And there's been really positive feedback from those efforts, particularly in the near downtown areas as well, where we have, shall we say, fraternal organizations. And so we've seen some immediate success, but we're going to continue to pursue it. We want to do it in a way that's engaging of all downtown stakeholders.
Yeah, I think from our perspective and from my perspective is, you know, trying to solve what I consider a geometry problem in the alleys downtown, and figuring out a way, more importantly, to add organics collection into that. Perhaps, we are not the entity best suited to have that discussion with downtown businesses, and I think maybe that's just a function of how we are. And I just want to make sure that in endorsing the acceptance of this plan, we still have the leeway to do that and go that direction, if that's how we might go.
We do, and you'll note in the comments I provided, putting in food waste collection, organics collection, essentially is a pretty big savings from greenhouse gas emissions to the tune of the same amount of people who drive around the city every day. So there's some compelling reasons to do it.
Yes, exactly.
And the elements are here to get us there.
Great, perfect.
Great, okay. Any other questions? Peck?
So I'm kind of late to this debate, and I really, or process, and I really appreciate what you guys are doing. Save money, and the greenhouse gas comment you just made, I thought was good. I'm just wondering, with the city committed now to carbon neutrality, what would it take to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions to zero in our solid waste management plan?
That's a pretty tall order.
I mean, there must be some.
Depends on how
when
you,
when
depends on
look-
how you define the boundary of the problem, to some extent. I think we're always, until we can get something other than a CNG or or other fossil fuel powered truck, we're gonna be challenged to do that. I think,
So-
generating less waste is a big part of that. Generating less waste means we can have less frequent collections in some regards, so that'll reduce emissions as well. But unless we have some offsets, I don't think we're not gonna, with the current technologies, we're not gonna be able to not emit anything. So we're gonna have to find other ways to offset what we do. But being more efficient and generating less waste that needs to be collected is a big part of that.
It sounds so like transportation's the big issue.
It is. Transportation is, the two things that'll drive us community-wide are transportation, home heating. And there are some things, which is a great conversation for another meeting, but there are some things that, I think you're well aware. We're trying to put 23 megawatts of power on a landfill as a way to, solar energy, as a way to offset some of the city's use. And as we come back and talk about things, we'll talk about the city as an entity. We'll talk about those things the city influences through the Unified Development Code and other aspects. And then we'll talk about things that we can help encourage our community members to do. But home heating is the biggest source of emissions, followed closely by transportation. And those are things that are weaving their way not only through this plan, but through the master plan and through the transportation plan. The carbon neutrality commitment is sort of the unifying thread that's woven through every one of the governing documents that we're putting together right now.
And this is pretty reasonable in the sense that you're not investing in anything like a new vehicle that would have to be replaced in order to meet our carbon neutrality goals.
I will share something that Dr. Stoltz will probably get mad over since we only talked about it this afternoon. But one of the things we had mentioned is, in addition to giving a monetary budget to council in April, to give them a carbon budget as well. And while one of them will go up, one of them should go down. And you can figure out which is which.
Okay.
So there's a strong commitment. We're going to, and I think personally, as the operating officer for the city, we're going to set an example. And we're going to push hard to meet the carbon neutrality deadline well ahead of 2030. And we'll continue to squeeze as much as we can.
That's great. Can I ask another question?
Yeah.
I like to brag about where I live. Makes me feel good or something. How does our recycling rate, I can't remember the term you used in here, how does that compare to other communities out there? Are we like in the top 1%? Are we in the top 20%? That kind of thing? You have a way of estimating that?
So I think we're closer to the top than the middle. But remember,
I was guessing that, but I'm just wondering how close.
It's hard because the number in there is 29, 30%. You'll see other communities that have 40%, but you have to really dig in to how they calculate. So first of all, we don't have beverage cans and bottles in the waste stream. Because if you're like me, you collect them up and take them back to Kroger's. So that's part of the value that comes out. Other communities include things like organics, and we don't include the compost in the
We do.
calculation. We do. There are other aspects, though. We don't include wastewater sludges,
Right.
which other communities do, that we do recycle. So,
Even road construction's another, that we
so-
don't, others do.
right, we don't.
We don't
we don't
include it in our
the
calculation, but it's a recycled product. But other communities include that, so it's a very apples to orange till you dig into what makes up the numbers. It really is difficult to compare.
Satisfy the braggers in the room, you want to include all this.
We could run a calculation, but the further you get away from what you measure, the more it becomes a swag and the less credible it becomes. But what you can measure is tonnage, and the amount of tonnage that we're disposing of has decreased, and the amount that we're recycling has increased. Is that a fair, correct statement?
Maybe just to characterize it a little bit, and speak up if you think anything I state is incorrect. On the residential side, we're really good, especially taking into consideration the bottle law here and things like that. Where we really fall short is in the commercial sector, and I think our diversion rate there is around 12%. So commercials, I mean, the residential side, we're in the high 50s, if I'm not mistaken. Commercial, we're in the low teens, and as was mentioned, overall, we're about 29%.
There's a lot of room for
So
improvement.
that's the big opportunity for improvement.
And all those rental properties, that's residential.
That is, yes.
And one of the things you'll know too is that we are highly cost efficient compared to other peer and leading cities. And that's buried deep within the bowels of the report if you dig out the chart.
Go ahead.
Oh,
Good, Mike.
Mike?
Can you two just talk briefly about the county regionalization effort in relation to this new solid waste plan?
So regionalization helps us with in a couple ways. To be successful at operating a MRF locally, we have to have certain volume of waste. So we'll only get there if we have, or I shouldn't say waste, but recyclables. We'll only get there if we can have more than the city produces, particularly if our focus is on reducing resource consumption as a whole. To be successful in the market today with very tight restrictions on contamination, working through a regional management authority helps us to set standards for what goes into the blue card, so that we are then able to, through the partnerships that exist, make sure that the materials get recycled, not just dumped somewhere else. So I think that's really important. There are other benefits to potential contracting where we can get some volume. But I think really the big thing is to exert an influence regionally on encouraging everybody, within the county area to recycle more. And having that dialogue is always helpful. I think we'll get there. I think we'll become a member. We have some issues that, council has justifiably raised that I'm going to address along with Crescent at their next meeting, and then we'll report back to council on the results of that. But there's no doubt that we will always have a good and strong influence because we are the biggest entity within the region.
So even after going through the planning process, staff still feels strongly about the benefits of regionalization?
Going through which process?
The solid waste.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think it's an important part of the strategy.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
I just have a couple of brief comments. First of all, I support the resolution, and I'll be voting for it. Be happy to also introduce it. But I have a couple of just brief comments, and that is, I hope that as we implement some of the recommendations, that we look at some of them carefully. For example, organics collection year-round, whether that really needs to be every other week or whether monthly suffices. I think it's going to be easier for people to remember that my organics are picked up on the first Monday than on what is it in the middle of the month. And I don't think there's a whole lot of organics that are accumulating during the wintertime, so we also save the greenhouse gas emissions from having a whole extra route. And then we're also talking about textile collections and bulky household waste. Those will impact nonprofits in the community that currently provide those kind of services. So I would hope that the city looks at how we can partner with them as opposed to undercut them in those kinds of activities. But in principle, we want to increase the diversion of any of those things, and I think that's captured in the plan. And so hopefully we can come up with a win-win as opposed to a win-lose solution.
Okay.
And one other thing I would add about the regional authority, we talked about that at the last meeting. I had direct questions to the two council members here, and I don't know if we need to have a lengthy discussion on this, but we've been talking about this for meeting after meeting. We know what the couple issues are. I sent an email out to a few people today, I think maybe it was even the entire commission, highlighting what we had addressed in the resolution that we passed, I don't even remember the date now, in April, I think it was. And it seems we keep on dancing around the same issues, and nothing really has changed in terms of what we know. We know that other authorities have various voting rights, or they can change when an investment is made. We know that we have the ability to not have imposed on us anything in terms of labor issues. And we also know that if we don't like the way that the authority is going, that we can step out. And so I really don't understand why we just simply all don't come to the dance and make a decision and move on with it. So that's a personal opinion.
Yeah. Well, here. Yeah. I think most of the people on the commission here would agree with that. So, any other comments or questions? Oh, Ann, I'm
Yes.
sorry.
Well, for folks who weren't copied on the emails that some of us were sharing today about this issue, and while Mr. Lazarus is still with us, I think what we're looking into, if I understand what we agreed to correctly, is that Mr. Lazarus is going to bring up with the WARMA board at their December meeting the couple 2 to 3 sticking points that we've identified, which is, as Commissioner Mursky mentioned, the weighted representation issue, to see if they would secure a commitment to fixing that before we join the weighted representation. And then also, there's some discrepancies still, and I hope that Mr. Lazarus can make progress on the issue of a responsible contractor. Because there's some people, and we discussed before this meeting that it's illegal for us to suggest that the other communities be required to use a responsible contractor. But nonetheless, that sort of sets a tone that we like well-trained, well-paid workers in how we do awarding of our own contracts. So those two things to take to the WARMA board for further discussion in December was what I think we were looking for. And then there was just a last third question about if the communities in the county can contract with our MRF and still have standards and enforcement without actually having the WARMA type entity, is the third issue. That, do you have to have a WARMA entity in order to have the enforcement and the standards of the materials coming into the MRF?
So, do you want me to respond?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
just
Because really, I was waiting for the
those
question.
three sticking points on those.
So weighted representation, I think, is something that the authority will have to decide whether they want to address now or into the future. I think our conversation about that has been the city of Ann Arbor will always have a disproportionate influence because Warmer won't get the benefit of scale if our materials are not included in the contract. So whether it's a formal or informal weighting, there's always that power of quantity. But that's something that's of interest and important to council, and I'm going to bring that up with the authority. When we talk about contracting, responsibility deals with the ability of the contractor to meet the requirements of the agreement. We always agree, we include living wage requirements in our contracts. and we require certain fiscal guarantees as well. So there is, the city is not obligated to enter into any contract where the requirements we have or the values we possess are not reflected in that contract, and we can do that without ceding our membership in the authority. And because, again, we are the bulk of the material that'll be processed, we have a strong voice in that as well. And then in terms of enforcement, particularly whether, and there may be non-WRMA members who bring materials to the MRF as well, and there has to be some sort of inspection protocol. The advantage of being part of the WRMA is that can be done throughout the member communities, and you can nip that at the point of origin, if you will. When you're accepting other materials from outside the WRMA or the regional authority, you probably have to inspect truckloads as they come up and turn things away, which is more labor intensive and more problematic. So if we can meet the capacity needs of the MRF through the regional authority, and all the regional members are educating the public to the same standards, it makes it a lot easier to ensure that the materials are not contaminated.
Chip?
You know, I think I would also add, as we're looking at the WRMA issue, is we've known for 15 years that we need to replace the drop-off station. And we're totally on the hook for the entire cost of that if we're not part of WRMA. I think that that's a significant part of why this is such a strong recommendation, is we need the financial help to do this, because a lot of that drop-off stuff comes from outside of Ann Arbor. I think that that's really important, but I think, you know, what Howard said about being able to work with our partners in the authority potentially to identify what's appropriate materials is really important. I think that making taking the step that council took last Monday night to authorize, you know, reopening the MRF, you know, I think that being very proactive in working with WRMA to say, here are our materials, here's what our standards are, I think that is only in our benefit. I just don't see any downside to it at this point. Of course, I haven't seen a downside to it in a long time, but I think it really makes a lot more sense now. I just, you know, Creston in particular, thank you. You've put up with me jousting with you now for, I don't know, 3.5 years, and I appreciate that. You guys have worked tirelessly, and I do really appreciate the effort and the integrity that you've brought to this, and even though we don't always reach the same conclusion, I really appreciate your dedication and your service and the work that you've put into this. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very good.
Great.
Any other comments? No? Okay, so I guess the next item on the agenda is the resolution that was submitted by city staff. Are there any suggested, let's have a discussion on it. Are there any suggested changes to the resolution that city
Well,
staff submitted?
I would move that we consider the,
Yeah.
I would move the resolution. Second time.
I second.
Okay, all who agree, say aye.
Well, it's for
For
discussion
discussing,
now.
for
Now it's open
discussing.
for discussion. Yeah.
Any nays? Okay, the motion passed unanimously, so let's have a discussion. Thanks, Chip.
Sure.
Who would like to start?
I'm fine with it as is.
I'm fine with it, too. Okay. All right, then, let's move forward to a vote. Let's see, is there a motion to accept the resolution as written by city staff?
So moved.
Second.
All who agree, say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? No? So it passes unanimously. So,
Well done, guys.
so thank you again, Crescent and Molly and Howard.
Go drink a
everybody on
beer.
city staff. Yeah,
Or 12.
Or
12.
or champagne or whatever.
okay. Well, let's see, now the next item on the agenda is new business. So, and the first item here is the 2020 meeting dates. that Emily circulated. We're going to keep the meeting dates to the fourth Thursday of every month. However, I would like to suggest that we change the times from 7 o'clock to 6 o'clock. What's everybody's feeling about that?
Tough for me to make it.
Sorry?
It's hard to make it better.
Oh, at 6, it's hard? Okay.
Can you say why you're thinking that?
Just so that we would finish off earlier.
I think that's hard for us with, those of us who have office jobs, it's a hard time to
Okay.
make.
Okay, then.
Just in terms of the time, I don't know if we've yet decided and formally have council's approval to add 2 youth members. Did that go through this commission
Yes,
yet?
I think
Yeah.
It was
It
in
did
Energy
go-
Commission it did, but I can't remember if it has been finalized here as well.
Yes.
I can speak to that.
Yeah.
So it was waiting on Energy Commission to approve its new bylaws.
Which we did.
Okay, fantastic. So after that, I think it is on a faster track.
Okay, so it'll go together with the 2 will go together to council, is that the intention?
That is correct.
Okay, okay, so it's waiting on council final approval, but the intention is to do that.
Yes.
And so hopefully the relevance of my question is, does that have any implications on our start time?
Yeah, it could be easier for the youth members once they come on board, but,
Having had 2 teenagers, nothing starts before 7.
okay.
It all depends on what else they're involved in.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
They
I mean,
have sports practices and
They have
things.
all their
It's not-
sports and then dinner and then,
Right. Okay, well,
And
we'll forget about that for now, then.
I
Oh,
might say that keeping our current time and just trying to manage the agenda so we don't have these 11 o'clock meetings might be a better approach.
I hear that.
And also help to keep the community engaged in what we're trying to do as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit easier to look through a 2-hour meeting on the archive rather than a 4-hour meeting.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. All right, then we'll forget about that for now.
We do
So-
need to approve.
I know, yeah.
We need to move on.
So is there a motion to approve the meeting dates for 2020?
so moved?
Yes.
Second?
All agree, say aye.
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 Any nays? No, passes unanimously. The next item is discussion on the 2020 work plans and work groups. Emily submitted a few handouts before the meeting, and she's going to be leading this discussion. So I give you the floor.
Okay, sounds good. So as you might remember from February when we did this last, it's going to be a lot more informal and a lot fewer papers on the wall. But I'm thinking that a good way to start the conversation about what you all want to accomplish in 2020 is to review what the work groups accomplished in 2019 and to see if, and to hear from the work groups about their plans for 2020. And then we can make a decision if the work groups are going, all the work groups are going to continue. And then offer, people can offer ideas about new projects, and we can see if that fits into existing work group structure, or if we need to look at something different. So I'm wondering if, so Chris Graham isn't here, is anybody else from the Natural Features Working Group willing to, Councilmember Bannister?
Or willing, I raised my hand before I found out what I'm willing to do.
I guess you'd be talking about natural features.
presentation.
Yeah, exactly. Where are your slides? So just talk about what you worked on this year, and then what your plans are for 2020, if you have any.
Yes. Oh, well, it sort of matches what you've got on the chart here. We covered a few things, having mainly to do with heritage trees and tree protection and GIC maps and then, so everything about the trees which are coming along. We had the 2 resolutions pending, one for further staff assistance with our work, and then also as one for ultimately a tree protection program. And we're looking at Austin, Texas, and Rochester Hills, and Novi, and so that, and we're meeting tomorrow from noon to 2, so we'll expect to make a bunch more progress tomorrow. But natural features, we focused everything on trees.
Okay, fantastic.
I'm going to make a controversial comment here, and it's something I shared with Steve beforehand, and I've shared it, I think, with the commission in the past. And that is, I'm concerned that in our working groups and here in this forum, that we talk a lot, we pass resolutions, but we frankly don't get much done that leads to positive outcomes for the city, where we can say, we did A, B, and C, and because of that, there was an increase in the tree canopy. Or we did X, Y, and Z, and because of that, our water quality, or we recommended, whatever we did, and there was an improvement in the water quality, or in the watershed health. Related to that, in February, I recommended that we have regular reviews of metrics that are linked to outcomes, and that as we review those, we target specific actions that will then lead to improvements of those outcomes. And I just don't see that happening. And in the Natural Features Committee, I agree with everything that Councilmember Bannister said, but we've done a lot of talking, but we really have not done anything yet. We do not even have, as we've done with multiple ordinances in the Energy Commission, we don't have a skeleton ordinance that we've looked at where we've started commenting on and say, what can we cut and paste from other ordinances that we think are a good practice so that we start to build something that works for the city of Ann Arbor. We hope maybe to start that process tomorrow, but we are just, I mean, if I apply this to some of the things related to carbon neutrality, we will be carbon neutral by 2060. And we need to be more outcome focused and outcome oriented, and I just don't see that.
Councilmember Smith?
So I'd agree with absolutely everything that John just said. I think Councilmember Bannister and I were given some homework for the council work session meeting of Monday night, a lot of which was give us performance standards that we can use to define success. And as we look at metrics, and certainly Councilmember Bannister and I can throw some things down on paper, but we look to experts like this body to tell us what are some very specific things that we can identify that we should be measuring. We just had a discussion of the solid waste plan. So much of what we need to be doing with solid waste is evaluating, we just don't have any data, like what routes are collecting the most trash, what have the highest diversion rates, where is the highest participation in composting. We don't have that information, and that's the information that we need. I think the second part of what John said is exactly right, is staff, we cannot look to staff to write ordinances for us. We have to take the lead on that. The working groups need to take the lead on that. That's the way it's always been with boards and commissions, is that if we're going to have a heritage trees ordinance, let's have some language and let's talk about it, the specific language. I think we're all on board with the idea of protecting heritage trees. Let's have that group bring us something. And instead of meeting and talking about who we need to look at, let's bring some stuff forward. I think our big accomplishment in 2019 was getting City Council to approve getting the MRF reoperational. That was the focus of, I would say, 75% of our discussion at this table. And I think there is, we can show that there was a deliverable there. But I think as we go forward, everything should be placed in the lens of the 2030 carbon neutrality resolution that council passed, and everything that we need to do is focused on producing something that has an outcome, as Commissioner Mirsky said. If it is an ordinance, we need to then talk about how we measure whether it's successful or not. If it is a policy, it needs to have parameters by which we measure the effectiveness of that. And all of our subcommittees need to be operating in a very specific mechanism like that. And if we're not doing very much.
If I may play catchball briefly with you on that. What I mean by outcome is that we actually see a positive result. I'll take diversion rate. So diversion rate, when the last solid waste resource management plan was adopted, we had a diversion rate of 29%. 6 years later, we stand at a diversion rate of 29%. We had a local MRF through the summer of 2016. We did not make any improvement in the diversion rate. So you can do 50 things and say, I finished 50 things, but if the diversion rate didn't improve, the 50 things weren't the right things or they weren't good enough. And we need to be focused on things that improve the diversion rate or improve or reduce the pounds per resident to landfill, or that reduce, for example, or improve the watershed health. We had a metric that we reviewed over a year ago here. We haven't reviewed that again. These are the things that are the bottom line. And I'll just give one more example. The city can say, we did 10 road projects. And if those 10 road projects were completed, that's great. But if 20 roads fell into disrepair and the overall net road quality drops, the 10 road projects were not good enough. And we need to be looking at our work the same way.
Anybody?
No, that's okay. Anybody else have thoughts about metrics and how to frame the work groups work together?
Well, it's more of a question. I think, in the past, we've talked about the sustainability dashboard, and I think that is kind of the foundation of what we're talking about for this, but I don't have a good understanding of where that is right now, if that's still what we should turn to build out towards the outcomes John is talking about, or if that, we need to revisit the whole thing.
We had a subcommittee of the Energy and Environmental Commissions that came up with recommended updated metrics. Those metrics were presented to both groups. As far as I'm aware, they're not being used really by anybody. That's not entirely fair. I mean, diversion rate we're using, we got updated statistics, which we didn't have for a long time, by the way. So, kudos to the city for at least providing them and knowing now where we stand. But generally speaking, the work that was done in that subcommittee is gathering dust. I mean, Susan.
Yeah, it hasn't been posted anywhere. We did the work and we passed it on, but it was not.
In the city's
put in
website,
any
the
public
dashboard
place.
is been updated a very little bit. For example, greenhouse gas inventory has been updated. Other than that, any of the other environmentally related sustainability metrics have not been to my knowledge.
Agreed.
I may be wrong, but that's my understanding.
Agreed.
And I feel like that's kind of the core of the problem. I don't know that it's up to this body to be setting the metrics that we should be pursuing. It seems like the metrics should be a citywide goal, and we can come up with recommendations to get there, but we don't, I don't think it's our role to say we should be pursuing this or that and then go forward with it.
Which I accept, and it'd be fine if we develop the resolution and pass it on to council and have council dictate that as policy. The metrics that are currently on the website, the A2Gov website, were never formally adopted. They were put together by Matt Nod. They were put out there, but Matt was in the subcommittee, and he said, these were never formally adopted by council. So we have admittedly a gap there.
Well, and it is our role to make recommendations, and I think that's what we did. What happens with those recommendations is not within our.
And I won't speak for Councilmember Bannister, but as I was filling out our homework for next Monday night, there are a million metrics that I could throw out there. I want to know what this body thinks we should be measuring and how we determine what success is. I know the big picture, which is, are we reducing our emissions, number? But outside of that, there are a million little things that go into that. You know, I want to know what those need to be so that I can then tell the city administrator in my homework assignment, these are the things we need to be measuring, these are the things that we need reports on every month, this is how we're going to determine if our policies are successful or not.
It strikes me that this is sort of accountability 101.
Exactly.
And the public was going to, especially with something, and I'm sure everything on our list that we have public advocates for, but certainly I'll take climate change. The public is going to want to see real progress. And so we need to be able to figure out what are the steps that we are going to take. I don't know, since I'm new to this game, who it is that, you know, can make them be real. We can recommend them. Does council have to do it, or do we, you know, whatever. I'm sure we can work that out. But we ought to, every time we say, here's a process that we want to put into place, we should have metrics, hopefully a very small number, that give us a sense of how well it's working. And greenhouse gas, in your case, your example, just tracking bulk greenhouse gas emissions might not be good enough. We need to be able to diagnose, if they're not going down fast enough, we need to be able to diagnose why. So we need to have metrics that can get to the why. And I just worry on the other side of it is that we could go crazy and have too many metrics, which is what I think you also want to avoid. So I applaud this. You know, it's something that just should be part of what we do. And we better figure out real soon how to make sure it becomes practiced.
Right.
You know, and I think the dashboard idea is wonderful. We got to allow the public to see what we're doing.
So I have to, everybody knows this is my big issue. If we don't have reviews, we won't have a discussion about, are they too many or are they too few? Can we do a deep dive? Can we not do a deep dive? Are the targets realistic? Are the targets unrealistic? Do we have enough projects? Do we not have enough projects? And without reviews, we won't be focused. And without reviews, we won't be able to say, this is what the problem is, this is what we need to do, this is the ordinance that we need to write, and the ordinance, is it done by this date or not? And if we don't have that drill down and then drill back up, we're going to talk and talk and talk, and we won't be outcome focused.
And then you got to come back in a certain amount of time and see, well, how's it working?
Exactly.
And that's where the metrics come in. And that's
Exactly.
where we then have to modify it. Especially on like our neutrality goal of 2030, we're not going to plan it all out first. We're going to have to just start it.
Right.
And it's going to have to be an adaptive management kind of strategy.
Exactly.
So I'm thinking that it sounds like there are possibly two levels to this metrics conversation. There's the level of citywide using metrics to track progress across many different disciplines and many departments, including the sustainability office. And then it sounds like there's also a discussion about using metrics in your your work groups, not subcommittees, but work groups. So we could have a larger conversation about the citywide thing. I think that might be a little hard.
Agree.
Given the time. If we could focus perhaps, I would suggest focusing perhaps on how the work groups could use metrics. I think that would be a more biteable item. So a recommendation could be that the work groups go and come back to us with proposed metrics that they feel comfortable with. Chip?
Let me suggest something that, what's the new solid waste recycling? Eileen suggested to us, is that we focus on goals and outcomes, and that all of these work groups kind of say, you know, if it's a natural features work group, you know, what is the goal of that work group? Is it to make sure that the city achieves this percentage of tree canopy? Is it to, you know, eliminate this percentage of invasive species? Like, let's each work group set goals that are measurable. You know, if it's a solid waste working group, you know, Perhaps a goal is, you know, it is going to be, you know, hey, we want to hit this target of organics collection and diversion. But for, you know, all of these work groups over the next month to set those goals and to come back to this body and say, this is what our goals are for 2020. And I think that would give us a good way to think about, all right, how does this fit together with kind of the broader mission of the commission?
That certainly could be something you guys could do. The hard part might be that the work groups are going to be relatively small. And if you're setting targets, it's going to be hard for a small group of people to actually move the needle, especially if there are, you know, staff in different departments working on it as well, to like correlate it directly to the work
I don't know
group.
necessarily that you have to move the needle. I think that you have to define what you're trying to accomplish. And I think we spin our wheels a little bit in talking about a lot of stuff in these work. I mean, just the whole idea of just a natural features work group, I mean, that's a pretty broad subject. You know, so let's figure out some short-term goals for each of these things that we hope to accomplish in 2020. You know, maybe it is, hey, we are concerned about tree canopy and heritage trees in Ann Arbor. So our goal is to create a heritage tree preservation ordinance. You know, so that there is we are going to do X. Yeah. And I think, you know, in the whole time I've been on the Environmental Commission is we do struggle a little bit to figure out, oh, what should we be working on? Because there's so many different things that we can get sucked into. Like, I do think it's important for us to set a work plan that's based on a goal. And we haven't done that in a couple of years, and I think it's shown. You know, I mean, I think we get sidetracked.
Okay.
Do you have ideas?
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree that I think we need to be goal-oriented, and we need to set not just short-term goals for the year, but say 3-year goals, so that we're looking at 3 years ahead every year. And then we can, you know, better see what might need to be done this year in order to get to another goal 3 years from now. So, yeah, Sharon?
I would also say that I think with this 2030 goal, that as we meet in our small groups, that we really think about that through that lens. Because I can think, I mean, I'm not on the natural features group, but just something that's occurred to me is, you know, tree canopy, but maybe it's tree canopy on the right side of the street so that we're actually getting more heat island effect out of it. You know, so that this is not going to happen without us all putting our brains on it. And I think that the 2030 goal has a certain sense of, not just a certain, it's a crazy amount of urgency in terms of us being able to make progress in the time that we have. And so it's certainly kind of lit a fire under me in terms of how I'm thinking about some of these things. And so I would just like to encourage all of the subcommittees, when we do revisit our goals, to really think about that through that lens and see how we can be most effective. Because this is not just sort of general thing. This is urgent for us to be able to make progress.
Chair Brown, would you be willing to work with each of the working groups chairs to make sure that they can come back with measurable outcomes or goals in the next month?
No, I will do that.
Okay. So does that sound like a plan is everybody okay with that? That in the next month, the work groups will continue to meet and come up with some tangible goals for 2020 and come back, and then the whole body can sort of approve that as a work plan? And if there are suggestions for different work groups or whatever, we can maybe have that conversation in January after we hear from the work groups. Does that sound like a good plan forward?
Yeah, I just also want to say that this body is charged with making recommendations concerning the air, the land, and water, and I believe we have 3 working groups. So there's a whole range of areas that we're not contributing to, and so if that's part of our charge, then I think we need to figure out how to address those areas that we're not currently addressing.
Yeah, and I'll note that from last year, one of the 4 items was climate action and clean air, and that there was not a subgroup formed.
Right.
Around that issue.
That's exactly what I mean. I mean, it's hard for us to make recommendations about metrics if we don't have anybody working on it.
Yeah, however, I mean, most of that, under climate action to clean air, what I read here is most of them were transportation options.
Mhm.
So maybe that's something that should be more pertinent to the
Right,
Transportation
or maybe we should be
Commission.
in communication with the Transportation Commission or
Yeah.
something, just to make sure all those areas are.
In that specific regard, I'd like to point out that the Energy Commission is primarily focused on that, and we just changed our bylaws to reflect that. I mean, I can read from the resolution, but my recommendation to this group would be, let's not throw another ball into our court and try to juggle it. Let's do a good job on the things that we're doing, and let the Energy Commission focus on that together with the A20 carbon neutrality activity, where we have 4 technical advisory committee groups that are working on different projects, trying to determine impacts and costs so that that will all feed into the budget process. And I think my recommendation to this group would be, let's focus on those other things, again, through the lens of contribution to carbon neutrality, like sequestration and how that ties to some of the things that you talked about. But let's not get into weatherization and transportation and EVs and things like that. Those are things that are already being done elsewhere.
No, I agree. We need to be,
And I agree with that also, but I still think we need to be putting all of that out in the public, in the sustainability dashboard, or some visible area that people who are interested in these areas can see the progress the city is making. And I'm not sure that, if it's our charge to be coming up with those sorts of metrics, it's not something we can do. And I agree that the Energy Commission should be doing that, but I think that we all need to make sure that we're communicating so that it's covered by somebody.
A good dashboard will define the goal, it'll define the metrics, it'll define the targets, it'll define who is responsible and accountable, including, you know, what the department is and what commission is working on it. So if we revamp the dashboard, that should allow people then to zero in on that and then go to the right meeting and approach the right people.
and that's city staff's responsibility, correct?
Yeah, I mean, for implementation, and it could be something that a dashboard could be looked at from the carbon neutrality goal, actually. So, I mean, in our office, things have kind of blown up because of the carbon neutrality 2030 goal. I mean, we had a 5-year plan that was, you know, we put tons and tons of planning effort into it, and now it's just a part of something that's gonna be much larger. So, if we can focus on the 2030 goal, that would be great, and have the metrics tie into that, like Shannon was saying.
Okay. And I want to remind everybody that our bylaws only require 1 commission member to chair a working group. We can recruit other people.
Right, right.
So, you know, we can recruit other people. So I just want to leave that.
I have a question. I want to apologize for sort of commandeering this conversation. So we started with natural features. I would be interested in hearing from the other working groups if they did really, let's put it this way, accomplish something. And I make a clear distinction between doing and accomplishing. And I'd be really interested in hearing what the other working groups potentially accomplished. Maybe I'm mischaracterizing the work of the commission by just a little bit that I know from what we've been doing in some of the working groups and not all of them.
Well, I can speak for I'll speak for the solid waste working group. We've set a few metrics. We've checked, that was our major SMART goal this year, and we've checked a few of them. However, I noted that one of the features of this solid waste, of this SWRMP proposal on page 8, they pretty much copied and pasted some of the, the recommendations from the waste list, solid waste resource plan update from 2013 and the climate action plan of 2012. And these are not SMART goals. So those which relate to solid waste, I think the solid waste working group will commit to creating SMART goals out of these that are consistent with the dashboard, and also whatever council might find useful information. For example, and then right here from 2012, RM14 from the Climate Action Plan is implement a compostable, recyclable, to-go packaging ordinance.
We're not allowed to do that by state law now, so.
Right.
There's a ban on banning.
So,
But
this-
that's, But that's also the thing, is that this body can be like, hey, Policy Agenda Committee, you need to have your lobbyist working on this in Lansing.
And we can provide examples from other states, they'll allow it,
Yeah.
or in other cities.
So we had waste or resource management talk. Susan, do you want to talk about water?
Sure, we can talk about water. We hit an obstacle that we didn't predict when we began. We met with a staff person who came up with some ideas, and then we were unsuccessful in getting any follow-up from that staff person. So we were sort of floundering for a while. We have reoriented and found guidance with a staff person, and our priority right now is with a new piece of data that came out of the Huron River Watershed Council, which says that the Huron River has the highest level of microplastics among the 29 Great Lake tributaries. We are interested in working with the Huron River Watershed Council and with the city to come up with an education program, and particularly to, we hope, promote a device called a coral ball, which you can put in the drum. Which you can put in the drum of a washing machine, which reduces the amount of microplastics that your load of laundry emits into the river. We're interested in having an education campaign in coordination with the work that's being done with the parks, having education at the Argo livery and at the Gallup livery, and hopefully being able to sell these coral balls at each of these places. And we don't have any metrics attached to it yet, but we are reaching out to all parties and seeing if we can establish those, and we can certainly aim to have those in January.
Fantastic. Am I missing a working group? No, I think we covered it all?
Yeah.
Okay, so then we will add it to the January agenda, a continuation of this item.
But more specifically, that all the current existing working group chairs will report on what their plan is for next
Yes.
year
We-
at the January 24th meeting.
Correct.
Okay.
And if you can perhaps get those, get that information to the chair maybe a week before our meeting,
Sure.
then he can work with you on tightening them up or making them more specific.
So we're from Huron. We're here for government class, but we need to get our agendas signed to like prove that we went. And also we have curfew, so.
Okay,
come
come
over
on
here.
up.
We can take
Thanks for
one
coming.
of us.
Do you have yours?
No, she has.
She's got both of them, okay.
Maybe we should make them reduce their carbon footprint by a certain amount to get the signature.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah.
Need to measure that.
Are you guys gonna walk home?
For all these?
Walk home.
Are you gonna walk
Okay.
home?
Yeah, do you guys want to start
Are you
signing your name?
carpooling? Are you carpooling?
Signature name and that you're a commissioner.
So what's this for?
Just
You just
pass
need
one down and sign it with your name, the fact you're a commissioner or a council member.
Yep.
They only
Yep.
need one.
Do you need all of these?
Yeah, we need all of these signed because like everybody needs their own one to turn into the t-shirt.
So 6 of them.
Yeah, but not everybody needs to sign, you just need one.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, a signature.
Here you go. Here's one.
Were you able to
mine.
get yours done? Did everybody turn in your signed agendas? Okay.
Okay,
Thank you for
great.
doing it for
Well,
all of
thank you.
everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Okay.
I
So-
think that was a statement that this meeting should wrap up.
Yeah, so Emily, are we done?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. All right, so the next item on the agenda is reports from committees, other,
The policy agenda items.
oh, the policy agenda items, yes. Let's discuss that.
So would either of the council members want to talk about how this fits into a larger process?
So I will, because I'm the chair of that
Fantastic.
committee. The city council has a policy agenda committee that recommends a policy agenda that council adopts. This directs our lobbyist in Lansing on how to work to further some of these interests that we have. We are asking all of the boards and commissions to give us recommendations on policy agenda items, i.e. state laws that that we are advocating for. I think great examples of some of these things are the fact that we are preempted from banning plastic bags, banning styrofoam takeout containers, you know. Any of these things that, if you know, we look at some of the PFAS issues and, you know, how can we advocate for good state law? So this body needs to weigh in on that. And I think by January, I mean, ideally, we'd like to have it quicker than that, but I don't think that a policy agenda is going to come before council, you know, in January, because we haven't gotten all of that feedback yet, and we don't have a policy agenda meeting in December because that would fall on Christmas Eve. So I think we are looking for, from this body, recommendations on policy positions to advocate for. I mean, there are a million, but give us all of them because we talk about all of them.
Thank you so much for doing that. So you can see that there are policy agenda items listed. Staff came up with 6, staff being Missy mostly. And then the current submissions were ones that this body sent in 2019. So that's what's considered the current submission. So, and I would say we probably have the most of any board or commission. What do you think, Councilmember Smith?
Yes, I think different boards and commissions have different levels of participation in this, but I think this has been the most active commission.
If I can comment on that briefly, and that'll shorten my report later on. The Energy Commission passed a resolution with recommendations of adding specific items to the policy agenda. Councilmember Eaton had provided us the fiscal year 19 list. We looked at that list. We didn't repeat any of those, but we added several things, and I have those in front of me, and they tend to cover, to one degree or another, the staff recommendations. I don't know if Josh shared those with either one of you. I have the resolution in front of me, but I would recommend that if we go through the process, that doesn't mean the Environmental Commission shouldn't be a second endorsing commission for the ones that we've done, but I would say that we should also focus on the things that maybe are not covered by what the Energy Commission has already done. So those are already passed, and they're in the hands of Councilmember Eaton, and I think Hayner's on the group, and you are, I think the 3 of you, correct?
They're all in front of Mr. Fournier, who's the staff member who takes care of our committee.
So we've been given a deadline that it had to happen at this meeting, but Councilmember Smith, you're saying we might have time to finish this in January?
I can tell you we don't have a meeting until the end of January, the Policy Agenda Committee. It is good to have all of this compiled. Having a resolution, I don't necessarily like doing on the floor, and perhaps I was not quite as organized as Councilmember Eaton in providing you the formal 2019 council policy document, our full agenda, which I think would be useful. But I don't know that there is, I think what I would like everybody on this commission to think about, and I don't want to ask you to do it at this table because that's too, short notice, is to what else? I think what we're looking for is give us other guidance, and you might very well say this covers it, and we'll keep advocating for these things. I think the purpose, for everybody in here to understand, the purpose of the policy agenda committee is to not be so reactive to what happens in Lansing, but to be a little bit proactive in trying to move legislation forward. The one thing we were successful with this year was something we've been working on for 2 years, which is the solar taxation issue. We were finally successful on that, but that was a big lift. Our lobbyists spent a lot of time working on our behalf on that, and I think this document provides, once council endorses it, this is what our lobbyists work on.
I've also been given direction from staff Kelly Beatty that we could also submit it through the chair. The chair could collect this information. So that might also be a possibility in terms of getting it to you in a more timely fashion.
Yep. And I'm happy to work with the chair to coordinate that.
Fantastic.
Can I just ask a clarification question? And that is on number 10, support and advocate for the incorporation of water reuse and reclamation systems in the Uniform Building Code. Is that basically kind of gray water?
Yes.
Okay. I'd say yes to that.
So do the two of you possibly have a due date that you have in mind to get suggestions from commissioners?
I heard January 23rd or so. January
Well,
20th.
I would think that if we can get some suggestions from commissioners by the holidays, by, Christmas, I think Steve and I can pull that all together. This body, if Steve can get something to me prior to, and assuming that I am still on this committee, which I don't know necessarily that I will be because we have new assignments, but it's my desire to remain on it. Meet on the 21st, I believe. So.
Of December or January?
January.
January,
So if Steve and I can have this body's recommendations together by the holidays, we can get together and have something formal for the council policy agenda committee meeting in January.
Okay, and I'd request any suggestions by December 20th. And I'll call it then, and we'll talk about it.
So is it okay to be talking about this stuff on email?
Well,
I thought we weren't supposed to do that.
yeah, I know.
Good point.
Well, tell you what, I mean, if it's less than a quorum, we can communicate about it in less than a quorum, because we're not making any decisions here. What we're doing is,
Well, does that mean we're going to just forward, if anyone sends you something, it will end up in the forwarded list?
yeah, it will.
Okay, because I think I would be very strongly in favor of those first 6 that Missy put in. I mean, we got to get moving on climate change if 2030 is really a goal.
Yeah,
And these
I-
things are critical.
I believe numbers 3 through 6 there are already, there's bills in the legislature
Yeah.
that have been introduced.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised, and the governor is really on board with this too, so we have a shot.
And these are all consistent with our current policy positions
Uh-huh.
that council has adopted. Some of this is a formality of let's make sure that this is all in our policy agenda moving forward. We have had a couple of issues that there isn't complete consensus on how we interpret that, but generally the carbon neutrality and the energy and the environmental things, there has been complete consensus on. We just want to be able to codify it in our documents so that when a bill comes up, and the whole purpose for this is we've been on the back foot on everything in Lansing for 25 years. And so when a bill comes up, particularly in a lame duck session, which is when all the worst ideas come up and tend to pass, our lobbyist knows what to work against or what to work for in those sessions without us having to pass a formal council resolution saying, hey, we endorse House Bill 3879, They know that, hey, we are really interested in adopting the zero energy code, and they will work with somebody to try and get that through. And they don't have to wait for a formal resolution saying we support this bill. They know that we support it, it's out there, that the city of Ann Arbor is behind that. That's the purpose of the policy agenda committee.
Okay, but, sounds great, but it still sounds like we all have to give you something.
Yes.
And so could I move that we give you those first 6, and that way I don't have to break any FOIA rules? And I've been totally involved in a lot of FOIA crap through my life, and I don't want to do that ever again. So, can I just do it here and be
Yeah.
done with it?
Yeah.
Because I suspect we have a lot of support around the
Yes.
Yeah,
table.
so I believe there's a motion to adopt all the staff recommendations. here on the policy agenda items?
Second.
Just
well,
one quick thing, though, just, there's no longer an MDEQ, it's now Eagle.
Eagle.
So,
Just change the.
just change the,
Oh, yeah, we're
for
just
any kind
talking
of
about
formal-
the first six.
yeah.
Right? For now. We're just talking about the first six, but yeah,
But I'm
thanks.
just saying if we're, yeah, so if any, but you said in addition to the staff ones, and so the current submissions are the staff ones, I take it? Or the,
my motion is just the staff ones.
got it.
I think there are a number of other really valid ones. I'm not saying anything negative about them. I'm just saying the first six are the ones that I would give to Steve if that's the process, and I'd rather do it here
Yeah.
and have a vote
Fair.
or whatever it takes to just be done with it.
Okay.
Okay, so is that clear? We have a motion, I understand, that was seconded to, for the commission to endorse. Yeah, the staff recommendations in this document. All who agree, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, passed unanimously.
So just to check the process, so Steve, you're going to send out an email saying, submit additional recommendations beyond these six to me. I'd recommend that if you can attach the fiscal year 19, and also attach the resolution that was passed by the Energy Commission, so at least people know what's been covered there. That doesn't mean they can't be seconded, but at least people have those additions.
That's okay.
And some of those address, like a national carbon tax or carbon fee and dividend, some type of legislation like that, Green New Deal, energy efficiency codes. There's a lot of overlap with a lot of these things here. Energy freedom, powering Michigan forward. I think there's a whole set of bills under that title. Those things were included.
Okay. Will do. Okay, so the next item on the agenda would be reports from committees, other commissions, council, and chair. I don't have anything additionally to report as the chair. Are there any reports from the committees, other than what's already been discussed in terms of the work groups? Okay, then, any reports from council?
We have a little bit more. We don't have a timeframe for it yet, but we are working with staff to revise the floodplain ordinance. And we are also interested in talking about, We're also interested in talking about how we could recognize the work that's being done in terms of development that's improving the watershed, in terms of keeping water out of the stormwater system and quantifying that in some way so it's visible to residents.
Okay. Anything else from the committees? Yeah. Anything from council?
I think you all know that we voted Monday night 9-2 to authorize the administrator to negotiate with Recycle Ann Arbor to reopen the MRF. I just want to thank Councilmember Bannister, Councilmember Eaton, everybody for their support for that resolution, but this body for all of the work that everybody has put in over the last 3.5 years to get to this point. I think it was very frustrating and demoralizing to a lot of the people in this room that it took this long, but I think, ultimately, your voice was very important. You served as a great voice for the community on this issue, and I think ultimately your consistent recommendations to reopen the MRF were really important in convincing people to make this decision. So I just want to thank everybody for all the work on that. It felt really good to move that ball forward a little bit, so thanks.
Okay. Anything else from council?
I just wanted to circle back again to the WORMA issue, and so just to re-underline that my understanding is that Mr. Lazarus is going to go to their board meeting in December and discuss with them whether they would commit to a weighted system of voting within the body and what their thoughts were on the responsible contractor language in their contracts. And then thirdly, whether you have to have a MRF entity to really get the enhanced enforcement and standards amongst the different cities and municipalities that might want to use our MRF. So those three things are coming up then at the December board meeting, so we can revisit this by email and at the January meeting. And then just also at the January meeting will be, hopefully Elena DeRiggi will have her integrated pest management resolution ready for you all to review. And prior to then, we're still working on the food gatherers resolution that we approved. That one is going to council. It got, I think, tied up in the attorney's office. And I think why we don't have our tree protection ordinance is that it was more difficult to cut and paste these different ordinances. The more we got into the detail, there was really a lot to it. The subcommittee has been working very hard, and if anyone wants to join and help us on that, we are accepting new members. And then lastly, on the tree issue, on November 4, you might have noticed that council declined purchasing of the 8-acre property over in Ward 3 on Packard Road with the green belt money, or with the green belt money for use inside the city. It declined to do that. However, also that same evening, it did approve instructions for Howard Lazarus to collaborate with the Housing Commission to explore the feasibility of affordable housing on that location as one source of funding to try to piece together. We're looking for a very high price of $4,760,000, but council did approve looking at affordable housing as a possible solution in the puzzle. And so this was a small win for the trees because it, as you may know, there's 57 bur oak trees and 208 woodland trees on that property that are gonna be 70% of them removed for the development. So the developer has been approved to move forward with his project, but parallel, we are also still exploring the feasibility of other sources of funding. So that was a partial win for the trees. And thank you for all your different ones of you who helped with that.
Right,
Thanks.
thank you. How about other commission reports? Planning?
A couple of things. One is that we rezoned several areas that were part of private property that were donated to the city for public land for parks. There were probably 5 or 6 parcels around the city, different sensitive areas or areas that didn't make sense in terms of the development that may make sense in terms of the city having more connected systems and things like that. The other piece is that there was a development over on Plymouth Road that was looking for some rezoning, and it made us think a little harder about our, we have a rather anemic solar ordinance in terms of what we consider kind of an advantage if you're looking for rezoning. And we have kind of environmental considerations, but we basically, our ordinance says you have to be solar ready, which is pretty weak. You don't even have to provide plans, you know? So you just have to have the right solar orientation, which, so once we looked at that more carefully, they were using that as their justification for, and there's just no way, getting back to the whole metrics session, to kind of really measure that. And so something that the Ordinance Review Committee is going to be looking at, and it would be great if there could be some partnership with the Energy Committee, would be like, what do we want to see when people submit these things, to understand what they truly are, what's the advantage to the city, you know, for how much energy are they really producing, to be able to justify checking that box as one of the public benefits that they put forward. So I think that came right on the heels of the 2030 thing, and so I think it's making us focus more, which I think is a really good thing, actually, for that.
Okay.
So I think there's going to be some further exploration and drilling down of what it means to have a public benefit for some of these environmental considerations, and that the solar, we need to see like a real deal plan. How much of that roof is covered, how much energy are you really gonna be producing? What's the real effect of that? So that's the direction that I think they're kind of heading in, that relates to this body. And then the other trend that is happening is we've had 2 drive-throughs come through Planning Commission, and there's been a lot of talk about saying no to drive-throughs. So, as a source of idling and emissions. So, it's a special exemption use right now, and so it's something that they have to ask for. But I guess I just feel like this whole 2030 thing has really brought some things into focus, which I think is good. But it also brought up the larger idling issue. We don't, again, have a subcommittee that's kind of on that air quality thing, and I know we have an ordinance about that. Is it enforced? Are there plenty of opportunities for us to be able to do education around that? Seems like that's an opportunity in terms of this 2030 thing that really relates strongly. So it just brought up that whole piece, and I thought that it might be pertinent for us to think about how that could relate to some of our work here, because there's something on the books, but how can we make it more effective? I can imagine 5th graders out in front of schools as part of their green teams, going up to people who are in their cars waiting for their kids who show up 20 minutes before and saying, would you consider turning off your car during this? I mean, there could be so many ways that we could be engaging the community to be able to not just have it be a police officer writing you a ticket, but something that we could really think about how we.
Deputize the kids.
We could, can you imagine? Like, they would love that. So it just got me thinking about the whole kind of idling piece, and that I think that I just wanted to bring that up with you all, because I feel like that's, again, with the 2030 goal, that it's probably something that we need to revisit again, to really think about how we can try to, through behavior management, basically, figure out how we can set that expectation in a way for people so that it becomes something that people even think about. Because I think they just don't even think about it right now.
I have a comment. I worked on that ordinance when we originally passed it, and there is a toolkit, an educational toolkit on the county website that I used. I went to, I think, every PTO council in every elementary school educating parents about it, and it's complete and it's easy to use, and I think that there are people that would be certainly able to go and do it, and I think that would be an easy thing to revive and to execute again.
And then with the new school bond that's passed,
Right.
maybe there's a little bit more attention on that.
Well,
So-
yeah, and asthma, and I mean, we approach it from all different angles, but there's a lot of material there that is ready for anybody to use.
That's great to know.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, energy?
We, as I mentioned, approved updated bylaws. We passed a resolution on adding things to the policy agenda, and we reviewed and gave input on a solar access white paper, looking at basically 3 different ways of treating solar access, primarily with the concern if someone installs solar, makes a $30,000 investment, $10,000 investment, whatever it is, and then someone somehow blocks that there might be some type of compensation required. So that's just the thinking, but there's not a decision how to finally address that. There's a whole committee working on that. And then I've mentioned we're working on a number of ordinances, and I only mention that when it gets to sausage making, these things, they simply take time. I mean, every one of these ordinances, lighting, changes to the specifications for the Orange Book related to lighting, home energy audit disclosure, EV readiness, requiring EV, a percentage of spaces being dedicated to EV charging. Each one of these groups have probably met 15 times and looking at, at an ordinance draft language, what is modifying the language, taking it to planning review committee, this and that and the other, and it just takes time. And I'll just add to that, we need to get better and faster if we have any chance at 2030. I mean, it's going to be extremely difficult anyhow, but what I don't want to see is a 2030 target where we meet it 90% by buying cheap RECs or offsets. That's not a way of meeting a 2030 carbon neutrality target.
I assume you just, and I'm sure you're doing this, but you go to a few cities in California and get their ordinance and just modify it?
In many cases, yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, this has already been done in many cities.
Yep. Or, Tucson, Arizona for lighting, or for, whatever, yeah, exactly. That's what we've been doing.
Still takes time.
It still takes time.
Like with the trees.
Yep, because there's different stakeholders here and this and that and the other, but yeah, that's exactly what we've been doing.
Great.
And that's what we want to do with trees. We have identified a few, but we have yet to start to piece it together.
Okay, anything else, John?
Nope.
Okay, Parks? Okay, nothing from Parks. I think that completes that section of the agenda. Any report from staff?
Sure, I'll keep it nice, short and sweet, and all about A20. For folks who are watching, City Council unanimously passed a resolution that we should be carbon neutral by 2030, for the whole city to do that. OSI, Office of Sustainability and Innovations, is sprinting as fast as we possibly can to come up with a plan by the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, which is going to be in late March. That plan will come back through commissions as well before it goes to council, so you will have a chance to comment on it. We're doing hundreds of people came to our first town hall that we had. And we're looking for even more people to come to the full-day town hall that we're going to be doing on February 22nd. It's going to be at Pioneer High School, and it's going to be open to the public, so keep that date in mind. We have about 54 community partners at this point, everybody from the NAACP to United Way, to the Sierra Club. We have and U of M. We have quite a few community partners, and one of the requirements of being a community partner is that you will do at least one event that we will be with you for to reach your membership. So an incredible amount of events happening. There's a survey on a20.org. We encourage folks to take it by January 6th. This is the first of 3 surveys that are going to go out to the public. We have 4 areas of concern. We're looking at mobility issues, energy and buildings, waste reduction, and adaptation. And so, as was mentioned earlier, there are technical advisory committees for each of these. And that is my staff update.
Okay, thanks, Emily.
Can I add one thing, 1 minute on that? University of Michigan had a really interesting board meeting. The fact that, this afternoon, the fact that Ann Arbor passed the resolution, I think had a positive impact. There were probably, there was an overflow crowd. I was there. There were no seats left upstairs. The entire downstairs was completely full. When I left to come here at about 5:45, the students had blocked the exit of the golf place where they hold the meetings, and were not letting any of the regents or the president leave. Wow. Because they hadn't commented directly on any of the student demands. Not that they were asking that they accept all the demands, but they hadn't even addressed many of them. One positive thing was that there was a proposed $50 million investment in a fossil fuel company, and that got voted down. But they still haven't taken action on divestment. There was a number of different demands, treating all 3 campuses the same, carbon neutrality, 2030 target, things like that. But I think we can definitely be synergistic, and the students were great, and there were a fair number of some faculty and staff people there as well. So if you drive by Stadium, maybe there'll still be people standing in front of the exit tonight.
You know, that 50 million investment. That was essentially authorizing us to spend $50 million. It was authorizing our endowment to invest another $50 million in fossil fuels. So it's essentially the first step in divestment.
On top of $1 billion that's already invested, apparently, and on top of what at least students claim was $400 million in additional investments since the carbon neutrality, the path to carbon neutrality was made. So, yeah, this is, but the main thing is, I wanted to convey to everyone, what we're doing here has an impact on the university and vice versa.
Okay, yeah, thanks,
That
John.
said, I don't know if we'll be bold enough to do 2030. Maybe.
Well, Doug Kelbaugh also spoke to the
He did.
regions today, talking about the importance of climate change and really trumpeting the fact that the city has moved forward, you know, work with the city together.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't necessarily think stuff like that falls on deaf ears with the regions.
That's great news, though, yeah.
Several of the regions were outside talking to people afterwards. I mean, they just didn't jump in their car and sit there and idle.
Okay. All right, so items for next agenda. I have on my list here the work group plans for next year and the work group structure, the WIRMA recommendations from Howard, the integrated pest management resolution that's going to be submitted, and something about the food gatherers, about the progress on the food gatherers request. Are there any other suggested agenda items?
Staff would like to add a budget discussion for the next upcoming fiscal year. So it'll either be Howard Lazarus or Missy Stultz coming to talk to you about the budget
Okay.
and get feedback.
Okay.
Did you list the resolution for the staff to assist the Natural Features Subcommittee with the tree ordinance? That resolution is pending
Okay.
to bring to you all then at the January meeting.
Oh, okay, I missed that. I just thought about the integrated pest management resolution
And
and the,
there may be
and the
one or
trees.
two tree
Okay.
protection drafts for the agenda.
okay. All right. Are there any other suggestions for next month? It seems pretty packed anyway. So our next scheduled meeting is for 7 PM on January 23rd at fourth Thursday of the month as usual. So this opens up the second time for public commentary. You want to say anything, Rita?
John, you just told everything I was going to say, because the Regents meeting was quite fascinating, and I would consider it a first step, and I also agree that the additional $1 billion in funds that should be divested was something that would be great to have you all, when you have opportunities to talk with people of the Regents or other faculty, et cetera, continue to do that. I am really pleased to hear the urgency that you are using to consider the issues. So keep going. Thanks.
Okay. All right, thanks, Rita. So there's nothing else on the agenda, so do I have a motion for adjournment? Okay. Is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, passes unanimously. All right, thanks, everybody.